Hello, good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us on what we think will be a very interesting and practical session from AMS regarding the use of generative AI in our assessment and selection processes. I can see people are just starting to come into the call now we're open, so I'll give you a moment or two to join before I hand to Nicola and Claudia, who will take us through today's session. This meeting is being recorded and we will share the recording after today's session. And we will have lots of time during the session today for questions and answers, as well as the chat function running as well for you to share your thoughts and opinions with us as part of the conversation. If you have questions, please do put them in the Q&A function so we can make sure we capture them and get a chance to ask Nicola and Claudia during today's session. We'll also be running some polls, which are anonymous, so please feel free to interact throughout today's session with us through the polls, through the chat, and pose any questions you have for us. So I'm now going to hand to Nicola to kick us off for today's session. Thank you, Nicola.
Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for joining us today for our webinar to talk about generative AI in the early careers selection process, a hugely relevant and interesting topic. And I hope you're going to gain a lot of insight from our session. And also, we're hoping to give you lots of practical takeaways. As Georgia said, please do ask questions as we go, and we'll try and pick up questions as we go along. So just to do some introductions before we get going, my name is Nicola Robinson. I've been at AMS now for 15 years and worked in the early career space for over 20. In my role, I work directly with clients. At the moment, that client is Deutsche Bank, where we provide them with an early careers recruitment and admin coordination service globally. As well as in my role, I provide more kind of broad consulting support to help organizations transform their strategies. So in our ever-growing early careers and campus team at AMS, we're in a very fortunate position to really understand the challenges and opportunities that organizations face, what works, what doesn't work. Some of our clients have huge global strategic programs which are centralized, and others are still hiring locally, recruiting early talent using similar methodology to an experienced hire, and moving through those challenges of producing data, reporting on ROI, etc. But this unique insight does allow us to provide advisory, consultative support to our clients. And as such, we've been able to develop some very deep partnerships, often lasting across 10 years or more. I do want to do a quick shout out to the ISE. I feel incredibly lucky to have always had their support in my role. They're such a fantastic organisation, and they really add value to what I do day to day, through their insights, through their focus on the future, and the network that comes along with that. So I'm really looking forward to the conference in a couple of weeks and hope that I'll get to meet lots of you there also. Right, I'll pass over to Claudia to do your introduction, Claudia.
Hi everyone, lovely to be presenting today with Nick. I'm Claudia Nutchins and I'm Global Head of Assessment and Selection Advisory. We're a group of organisational psychologists and assessment subject matter experts. Broadly speaking, our work is everything to do with assessment and selection, and we advise our clients on the design, the evaluation, the delivery, the implementation and the integration of assessment solutions in talent acquisition processes. We work at very large scale across all hire types, across all industries, so have really varied portfolio of work. So, and of course, the subject obviously that we're talking about today is hugely relevant to what we're doing on a day-to-day basis, so hopefully can share some insights and some up-to-date viewpoints really on the state of play for generative AI in this space. I'll pass back to Nick, who's going to introduce the topic.
Thank you. Okay, so the first slide is around what is generative AI. It's a type of artificial intelligence that can create new content such as text, images, video, or music by learning patterns and structures from existing data. And the most well-known form of Gen AI is ChatGPT, already widely used and incredibly effective at many reasoning tasks. A quote from Arctic Shores, not sure if they're on the call today, but 7 out of 10 job seekers expect to be using ChatGPT to help them complete a job application at assessment in the next year. And 17% have said they're already doing so. So currently the intention to use ChatGPT outstrips the actual use, but we know this will increase. And if you can see these quick facts about ChatGPT, you can see that it's improving, it's changing, it's been significantly developed at a very quick rate. So we've already got ChatGPT 4, which is available by subscription, and does create some better features and functionality for users. And in the summer this year, they're expecting ChatGPT 5 to be launched. And there's a lot of speculation at the moment about what that will look like. We're expecting it to have improved comprehension, so a better understanding of nuanced language, idiomatic expressions and complex instructions, which should lead to more accurate and relevant responses. The information that it's going to contain is going to be more up to date, and there's going to be enhanced mechanisms to verify facts, which should reduce the spread of misinformation. The idea is that there will be more of a focus on the enhancing the user experience, increasing accuracy, and ensuring ethical AI deployment. And those, I guess, are some of the big question marks that users have around AI, the ethical use of it, but also how accurate it is. So I think ChatGPT are focused on that, and we'll see what ChatGPT 5 looks like. It's also going to be more customized, so it's going to learn and adapt individual user preferences and styles over time, so it will be able to create more personalized responses, which will come with its own set of issues in terms of applications. It will have more sophisticated interactive capabilities, so it will ask clarifying questions and guide users through multi-step processes, which will enable users to get more and more content. As I said, there's going to be further advancements in reducing bias, ensuring fairer and more ethical AI interactions, and more content moderation. But it's also going to be able to integrate better with other tools and platforms, which means it can perform a wider variety of tasks. So it can handle spreadsheets, generating code, or interacting with database. So very interesting what that's going to look like when it comes out in the next couple of months, and I'm sure there'll be lots to discover there. I mean, a key consideration really is that although ChatGPT and Gen AI is changing what skills we need to assess with our candidates in the early career space and how we assess those, it is still worth making the point that I think always gets made on these calls, that we still need to be assessing the very human skills that are going to continue to be extremely relevant in the world of work, collaboration, creativity, agility, adaptability. So we still need to be focusing assessment processes on those two. If we move on to the next slide. So I think as more and more candidates are using generative AI to complete their assessments, there's lots of decisions to be made about how we respond, and that's what we're going to be talking about in this webinar. Whether as an organisation you condemn generative AI and try to limit its use, or whether you embrace its capability, as the candidates are doing, and evolve your hiring process accordingly. So anecdotally, how we see students using ChatGPT are to write CVs, to respond to application form questions where they're asked for motivational statements and written answers. They're able to respond to video interview questions, can create scripts, using those sort of well-known video interview questions that many organizations ask. They're able to pass coding tests, and also correctly answer online assessment test items. So many of you, I'm sure, have these type of assessment processes as part of your early careers process. So it's just worth noting that they'll be able to use ChatGPT to help with any aspect of that. And what we've noticed this year, in particular with the organizations we support, is repetition. So we've seen organizations receive lots of similar responses, lots of applications with very similar language or repeated phrases, particularly in that kind of written assessment and samey kind of cover letters, lots of matching answers. AI generated text often has a very consistent tone and style, so it seems very sort of polished and formal, and this seems unusual across an entire application and can result in some very generic content. We've seen a lot of that. The content may lack the personal anecdotes and unique details that would be part of a normal application, handwritten or computer written application. It might be that an AI application uses kind of overtly polished language, so it might have impeccable grammar and vocabulary, it may be more sophisticated than you might expect from an applicant's background, and lots of use of generic phrases, so buzzwords, commonplace phrases, without much personalization. And you might see that there's a mismatch with a resume, so inconsistencies between the style and language of a cover letter or an application might not match the resume, especially if the resume contains kind of less personal language. And then there might be an unusual level of detail, so extensive knowledge of the role that they're applying to, and or the company in the industry, which seems inconsistent with the candidate's experience. Unilever in particular have reported receiving lots of AI sampled responses to their motivational questions. We see organizations that we support in the finance sector also receiving lots of kind of samey answers within the candidate applications. So I don't know if that's relevant to you guys, whether you're starting to see that through your process. I think we've got a poll actually that Wale is going to put up for us now, just so we can get a sense from you guys on the call if you're experiencing the same challenges.
I think the poll, sorry, just to clarify, was more around how you're currently using generative AI in your assessment tools. So what we were kind of interested. So obviously, Nick has just talked about candidate use of AI, which we are seeing, and real evidence of that, and it's likely to get more and more common. But what we're really interested in as well is what are you currently using generative AI to do in the assessment and selection process. So it'd be great if we could get your kind of views on this, remembering it's anonymous. So are you using generative AI to review candidate CVs or application forms? Many ATSs have that functionality in them and can use it to kind of pass information from CVs. You can use AI or algorithmic AI to automatically score assessments in screening solutions for early careers. We use those a lot. Digital interview scoring is less common, but actually we'll come to that in a minute. It'd be interesting to hear whether anyone is using that. And then proctoring. So Nick has just talked about a lot of the issues that we're seeing around candidates using ChatGPT or similar to script their responses, or even cheating, and whether or not AI can be used to kind of combat cheating. And then also a really out there, but definitely going to be happening more and more, is using chatbots for responsive assessments. So actually a conversational assessment that can be generated using a large language model approach. So it'd be lovely to see if we could have if you don't mind clicking, if you're doing any of these, that would be really useful. As a single choice, I know, but so just choose the one that you're using most often would be great. Give you a couple of seconds, and please feel free to kind of put your comments or ideas in the chat as well, or in the Q&A. Great. Okay, so we'll leave that there, and I'll just sort of click on and start to talk a little bit about what we're seeing in terms of assessment vendors and how they are using generative AI to innovate. One thing I'd say is that it's similar to the candidate use of generative AI, is that the intention to start using AI to innovate in assessment selection outstrips the reality of it, and also client uptake of it, which is why we wanted to ask that question about what you're currently using. It'd be really useful to understand that. So there's a real opportunity in assessment and selection to do some really cool stuff in this space. And the first one would be around item generation and content analysis. So there may be some psychologists on this team, on this webinar, or people involved in assessment design. And certainly item generation and content analysis is quite tempting to use generative AI to do that. We ourselves are avoiding it, but I know that I have spoken to other designers and providers who would definitely be comfortable doing that. the one thing I would say just before I sort of talk through this this list is that at AMS we don't have any product. So what this is very much kind of overview of the landscape that we work with partners. So we work with all the big names in assessment and selection through our client network. And so what we're able to do is kind of look at the landscape and kind of say what's happening in all of the vendors. And this is the sort of general themes we're seeing. So item generation, content analysis, certainly that. The big one for us is automated scoring of assessments. In early careers, we have a lot of blended assessments, personality, cognitive assessments that are used. And in the main, when you've got high volume, automating that makes sense. And automating the scoring has been very much part of the sort of service that test providers offer for a few years. So many of our solutions are automated. The scoring is automated. In fact, in the US, it's worth saying this, it's not so much in the UK, but in the US, that automated scoring is treated the same as as AI would be, even though it's algorithmic. But so we have to go through we do go through quite strict evaluation, validation stages to make sure scoring is fair. But also you can have interviews using algorithms. So the algorithm will create prompts and probes. There are kind of co-pilots, interview co-pilots, and there's also natural language processing that would load onto different competencies, so load text responses onto coding, onto competencies to give you scores for those. Adaptive testing, so we can create this is not used as much as people are talking about, but actually adaptive testing using generative AI, we can create personalized assessment journeys in theory. It's a matter of time as to whether or not we'll be able to do that, and they need to be really robust and well researched, but certainly adaptive testing is a big one for the future. So that if you answer a question in a certain way, say in a situational assessment, the large language model would be able to feed you the next question. So you'll be able to see these and then score your responses. So this is definitely within the realms of the possibility available to us. So that's a really interesting space. AI proctoring is used a lot, so but not necessarily in the UK market, but a lot in sort of overseas markets where there is concern about cheating and people sort of impersonating, whether they're using other kind of sources. So very much an area to look at, but and it's definitely being used at the moment. And then another area is around chatbots for assessment coaching and for responsive assessment. So I've talked about that a little bit already, but basically to create assessment coaching is really interesting, and it's one of the things we're seeing is a need to respond to reasonable adjustments to people that might have additional needs, to give candidates who from less represented groups a better chance at assessments. Assessment coaching can be a really useful tool to switch on, and we've seen a few providers include that. So assessment vendors are really going for this. What's interesting is that I think about 5 to 7 years ago, lots of people said they were using AI, and then there was quite a lot of kickback on that and quite a problems with that, some of which really like all over the press in the US. So now people are being much more cautious, and there's a few things that really we have to contend with, and the big one is the law. Legal and regulatory risks are really big. The US is particularly fraught. The EU legislation is likely to be, I'm not an expert, I'm not a lawyer, but the EU legislation is based on first principles and is therefore likely to enable us to be much more innovative, but within very clear boundaries of ethics and best practice. But there are obviously big firms who, from a reputational perspective, absolutely kind of clear that they do not want to be using AI because they're so concerned about the reputational risks. So we have financial services clients who say to us, not actually in the UK, but in the US, who say we are not using it. We think they will be persuaded and will eventually watch others do the same and come on board, but we do see lots of that happening. There are legitimate concerns about algorithmic bias. One of the issues we have in generative AI and all of this space is that the people designing, the users of these assessments are not experts in the engines that power them, and therefore we can have to have subject matter experts in the mix to really understand what vendors are selling us, and that's a very big concern. And we often don't have the right people in organisations to really interrogate whether or not something's accurate, whether something's fair or legally compliant. So there's lots of other things. There's lots of research that has been done about employing candidate acceptance of AI, but actually that's very varied. So you will get some studies that say that, and definitely a couple of years ago, that candidates will be very much rejecting of AI use. And I've read a research study yesterday looking at current current talent pools for early careers, and they are less concerned. I really would not be at all, worried if AI was being used. So I think it's changing very rapidly, and it's probably not enough to say, oh, our candidates wouldn't like it. I think that actually the tide's turning a little in that space as more people use it in their work and in their daily lives. So there was lots of things, considerations. Again, as I say, the intention to innovate outstrips the actual innovation, and we're finding many of our clients sort of not wanting to be the first to go. So I don't know if anyone's got any kind of comments or questions before I move on to the next slide. I can see a few. I don't know if there's any questions in the Q&A.
Can you see the results of the poll there, Claudia?
Probably not.
They popped up on my screen. I didn't know if they'd pop up on yours.
Yeah, let me have a look quickly. Polls, there we go. Okay, so around half of you said that you're using, around half the people that responded said that you were reviewing candidate CVs and application forms using AI, which is what we'd expect. So can see there's a kind of cascade there of the different we did put them in order of the kind of most likely. You can see that nobody said that they were using it for digital interview scoring, and that's very much what we're seeing. We have clients who are currently trialing it, but we don't have any. That isn't to say there aren't people out there using it, but we don't have any who are reliant on it as a source of review. So it's just a really interesting one. That's exactly as we would expect. At the front end of the funnel, we're seeing much more automation, much more use of AI for sifting, screening, early screening, and then it gets less and less as we go down the funnel, to be honest.
Claudia, we have a question when you're ready as well.
Yeah, sure.
So Sandy, thank you for popping this question to us. And it's also to the audience as well, not just Claudia and Nicola. The question is, does anyone have any real life examples of how they use AI to efficiently manage the quantity and quality of applications? And has the conversion rate improved compared to life before AI? Great question.
Yeah, great question.
Two
and
parts,
and lots
both quite tough.
Yeah, lots to unpick there. So first of all, interestingly, conversion rate is less of an issue for our client base because they have too many applications. So one of the things we're seeing is the average, I think, Nick, it may be that you've got more up-to-date stat on this, but the last time I saw a stat on this, I think the average early graduate candidate is applying for 9 programs. We have, in some of our geographies, we have tens of thousands of applicants per position. So actually conversion rate is the least of our issues. What we want to do at the front of the two fairly and safely and in an engaged way is to screen as many people out as possible and get the right people through to the next stage. Application is an area that's slightly in my space, but probably sort of as well, more in Nick's space as well. So application, we are finding that a particularly problematic area in terms of generative AI, because if it doesn't matter what question you ask in an application form, it can be written by generative AI, and that's what we're seeing. We're seeing this repeatedly. And so what we're trying to do is put the assessment solutions almost right at the beginning. So we use the assessment solutions to screen rather than just the application form. And actually, I was at a conference a few weeks ago in the US, and asked them the question, what did they, on a panel, asked the question, what would you do? What will happen to resume? And they were fairly sure that in the next year or so, they will no longer be screening resumes for early careers candidates. I mean, I'll be surprised if it happens that quickly, but I think we are seeing that resumes, CVs are no longer going to be a really reliable method of screening. So early assessments, early digital interviews, early and really creative application forms with human touch added into the mix is probably the way forward. There isn't a single solution, I don't think. Nick, I mean, you may.
Well, no, I was just I was talking to someone in our team this week actually, and they use AI on the AI part of HireView for their on-demand video interviews, and it does automatically screen the video interviews and then it ranks them. So it splits them into the bottom tier, which would get an automatic reject, the middle tier, and the middle tier who then have to be manually reviewed, and then the higher tier who get an automatic pass. So I guess the team have worked on creating these benchmarks, and then what that's meant for our team is they've only had to review 26% of the total video interviews submitted by the candidates, and the AI has done the rest of the scoring. So because they're in charge of organising which get through automatically, it still means that there's this whole middle group of people that, in case they were concerned, I guess, about rejecting or putting through the wrong level of people, they can alter that in line with what they're seeing as people start to apply. So, I mean, I think that's a really efficient use of AI in terms of cutting down that that huge volume of screening that happens at the start of most early careers processes.
Yeah. I mean, there's so much to unpick as well, because obviously you wouldn't put a digital interview very rarely as the first stage in an assessment process, because it's not that it's an unusual first stage. So but for some clients it is a necessary approach. So it's really interesting. I think people are really grappling with this. These volumes that they're having in the applications are vast for many of our clients. So, yeah. I mean, we use providers like SOVA, SHL to develop blended screening assessments. They have algorithms in them, so they will reduce funnels. And we've got solutions in some of our clients in some of the volume areas where actually they're only really worried about adverse impact in gender. They don't actually collect data on ethnicity in some of the markets, where they are getting 70% of their candidate funnel reduced through automatic scoring of blended assessment. So that's an example of how it can work. But we don't use those high cutoff scores in other regions, where as soon as you start monitoring for other things, the risk there is too high. So we set the cutoff scores lower in other regions. That's really interesting piece about the flexibility you have to have across markets using this approach. So thank you, Sandy. Good question. That would take me probably at least 3 hours to answer that fully, but you'd be bored stiff by the end of it. I'm going to just move on, if that's okay, to the next question, just wary of time. One of the interesting things for us is that we've obviously been through all the stages associated with AI and assessment. And I would say that about, this time last year, myself and the team and other professionals in my space was talking about, is this the end of assessment and selection as we know it? Is generative AI going to mean we can't do anything we've done before? And I think that's been a real concern for us, and we were sort of kind of not quite sure what to say to clients. And what we were finding was this whole range of clients who were just ignoring it and pretending it wasn't happening. So complete head in the sand, either not aware or deliberately just ignoring it and hoping it might go away. to this downright panic. So actually we were finding that clients, or even people, prospective clients, were saying to us, if you can't guarantee us that this is not a problem, we won't work with you. We're not going to do anything. We're absolutely panicking. We had people stopping doing certain assessments overnight because they were panicking. What we've done is basically say, okay, let's get ahead of this. And the way we've done that is by being very much this thoughtful, considerate, looking at the evidence, trying to learn as quickly as possible. And so in the last year, I've learned and spoken and read and talked more about AI than I ever thought I was ever going to have to. It's a fascinating area. Luckily, I also find it interesting. And I think what we're seeing now is huge opportunity, but it's quite still finding in our client base that we have got these range of responses. We've got another quick poll on this one. So could you let us know where you think your organisation is when it comes to reactions to AI, specifically in assessment and selection? So are you head in the sand, embracing and responding, or sheer panic? And you can see on that slide how we describe that. Now, obviously, we understand it's a sliding scale, but if you don't mind just saying where you are on that, that'd be fantastic. I mean, again, very interested in hearing any questions or comments or reflections about this. I think the other thing that can easily happen is if you go into LinkedIn, for example, you can find that you've really there are people whose vested interest is to make everyone really frightened about this, so they can sell you their product, which will solve all the problems and take all your panic away. So I think there is, and there's also people selling lots of books and their expertise on this space. So I think we have to be evidence-based in our approach to this, as we should in all of our work, and really start to kind of read around the subject, or find experts that you can talk to and give you advice. I mean, the big thing for me has been recognizing that I cannot be an expert in this space, and then really trying to listen to people who are, and that's been a very important piece. So great to see that. So 74%. It's interesting, if I'd have asked this maybe a year ago, we might have seen a little bit of a different profile, but that's fantastic that people are sort of saying, actually, in the main, we are really embracing and responding to it. But we've still got a section of people who perhaps their organizations are kind of more pretending it's not happening. What we're finding is, if they're an organisation that is involved in technology, if they're very large, if they're kind of leading edge in terms of their offering of services, then we find that they are more doing the embracing and responding. But we have had a fair degree of panic as well. So that's really interesting. Thank you for that. I think Robin has asked a question about validity and efficacy of solutions. Yeah, so this is the big issue. So the big driver for us is to not do anything that hasn't been researched for its validity and fairness, and that's a very important piece. And I'm going to come on to that a little bit in the subsequent slides, Robin. So if I don't cover it, we can come back to this. But I think people like us and the decent vendors in this space, that's their raison d'etre, is they are not trying to sell AI for its own sake. They are looking at AI actually making things fairer. If you think about the standard interview and the amount of bias involved in an interview, there's an opportunity in the review and the scoring and rating of candidates after interviews. There is a huge opportunity there to make that much less biased and much more fair, using really well monitored and really well designed AI. And that's a really interesting and very good user case for this. So, and also the interface is often can be designed in a way that feels much more inclusive for underrepresented groups. If you've got adaptable tones of voice, if you've got more video content, but that can be adapted to suit different groups, I think that's a real opportunity to how we present the assessments as well. So, but more being talked about than actually being done. So it's a good question. One of the things we have found, just going back to, and this speaks to your point a little bit, Robin, but one of the things we found is that in the people in the middle of that spectrum, what we're seeing is very much a kind of multi-pronged approach to managing the risks associated with generative AI and assessment. This is just a kind of talking piece. I'm not going to talk through every bullet point, but what we've done is looked at what are the different ways that you can manage this and tackle it. One of the big things, and I haven't because I've talked about this, is that we've got to stop thinking of generative AI use by candidates as cheating, because it isn't necessarily as simple as that. And so we have to think about, first of all, what's our kind of policy around AI? What are we saying? What's our tolerance for use in everyday work? If we're using ChatGPT in our work, is it therefore really hypocritical to kind of refuse to let our candidates use it in the process? If they are going to use it, then we need to design assessment processes that kind of recognize that and spell it out. Or if we don't want them to use it, we need to tell people. So there's a huge range of approaches. We've seen clients who are taking a completely hard stance on it. So they are asking people to sign waivers. They are telling them that they will spot them if they cheat and that their applications will be discounted. And then we have others who are playing with the ideas that we will encourage them to use generative AI, but we'll do so in a way that shows that they've used it intelligently. So there's different ways of doing it. The test providers are redesigning their tests in the main. So simple text-based assessments are actually very susceptible to ChatGPT, and that we have actually stopped using simple text-based verbal reasoning and simple situational judgment tests in many of our solutions, just because they're just so easily done. I mean, they're so easily completed using ChatGPT. But so there's a range of different sort of tactics. And again, I could spend a long time talking about this. Design and engagement is really important. So you need to think about what it is you want to measure. If you are interested in people's skill at using generative AI, then use it. Ask them to use generative AI as part of the process. But we need to understand, we still need to know what we're measuring for design. That's really important. And actually the legal challenges will be around whether or not it was job relevant. And that job relevancy is very important. We need to explain the risks of using Gen AI to people. We need to state expectations of the rules, and we need to inform them of checks and verifications if we're going to use them. So there's lots of different things we can do in how we engage candidates and how we design the experience. Application, there are things we can do. So you can have CV-less approaches, that helps. We tailor application forms, so you're really asking people for very personal responses that they would struggle to get ChatGPT to do for them. We would have maybe more of an early recruiter involvement in application where we've got smaller volumes, etc. Screening assessments, we have discontinued use of simple verbal reasoning tests and SJTs. As ChatGPT gets better, others tests are going to become vulnerable as well, but there's things we can do. We can do timings, we can use proctoring technology in the solutions to stop people from using ChatGPT. Behavioral assessments are less vulnerable to it, but that's only a matter of time, I think, before that they start to be vulnerable as well. Video delivered assessments, they were seen as kind of maybe the answer, but actually ChatGPT 5 will be able to do video-based stuff as well, etc. So there's some things we can do, and we have just developed for a client with a provider, a well-known provider has developed in collaboration a set of adaptable and parallel versions of all of their assessments as well. We can adapt digital interviews, the way we do that, to reduce temptation to use scripts, and recruiters and hiring managers can be trained. That's an interesting one, because actually that's quite tricky. We can train recruiters and hiring managers to spot it, but unless we've got a clear policy about what's cheating and what's allowed and what's not, it's actually very difficult to do anything about it. And so we've had cases where we've had market TA teams saying to us, we know people are using ChatGPT, and we're saying, well, did you tell them they couldn't? And if you didn't, then actually you can't discount that application. You don't know they've used it. You suspect they have, but actually it's a bit of a difficult situation. So that, again, that is happening more and more, but I think we have to be a bit careful about how we apply this sort of preventative approach. And then finally, final stage assessments is less of an issue, but certainly kind of using final stage assessments for that face-to-face, for that kind of validation of what people may have used ChatGPT on in the former bits of the process. So someone, one of our assessment vendors said very recently to me, honestly, we've always said multi-measures are the same criteria along a process. The use of generative AI is it making that even more important. We need to measure the same things in a few ways to make sure that ChatGPT use isn't kind of skewing results. So those are some of the things we say you can do. There are many more, but these are some of the things that we're advising clients on. So I'm not going to talk about this in any great depth, but one of our partners, Sova, and I know Shaw's has done something similar. Lots of the assessment vendors has kind of looked at their tests, their tools, and sort of said how risky are they. But it's worth just, you know, if you do have vendors, is speaking to them about their attitude towards this and what they think the risks are. So at the time of looking at this is about 8 months ago, we obviously agreed with them that verbal reasoning and situational judgment assessments were very susceptible to being answered with the free version of ChatGPT. But then there's, you know, some complicated things to also think about, which is that it also depends a little bit on the sophistication of the prompting. That dictates how much more advantage you can get. So actually you need to be quite good at using ChatGPT to get an advantage in some of the tests. And so things like, at the time, ChatGPT wasn't able to do the numerical stuff very well, all the abstract reasoning. It is getting better at that. But we could see that you only needed very basic skills in ChatGPT to get a good response on a verbal test. And then finally, role complexity and verbal content load is also dimensions to look at. So if the assessment itself and the role that you're going for is a bit more complicated and the verbal load is lower, then you get a lower risk. So, and this is it's this kind of thinking about complication and the verbal load is, you know, the simpler and the more verbal it is, the more that ChatGPT can do it for you. This is changing all the time, so this is probably out of date even as we speak to it. So I think we're probably seeing much more of the high risk across these assessments, but very quickly the vendors are reacting to this, and they're innovating a lot to try and get around this. And I mean, you know, again, you know, I speak to vendors all the time. I had a session with a vendor just last week, and he said that he thought that in the next sort of 2 years we wouldn't be doing sort of standard cognitive assessments anymore at all. We'll be doing much more work sampling, situational adaptive assessments. So, you know, he's in the industry. He is one of the well-known people in it, and I think he, you know, he's probably right, which will be interesting times for people who can't keep up. So last slide, before I kind of open the floor to questions. This is a bit esoteric, but it's I think is quite interesting, is that I think one of the things is we need a strategic response before you do the tactical responses, or maybe in parallel. And one of the things we've said to people is, okay, if you want us to react in the assessment and selection space, we do need to do something that aligns with what you're saying to people organizationally. So if you've got your own version of ChatGPT, but you're not allowed, you know, not using any AI in the assessment and selection processes, that kind of doesn't marry up very well. So let's think about what your policy is. And you know, there are real risks. There really are, and there are real risks with how we do assessment currently. I mean, a big risk is that traditional assessment will stop being able to differentiate. And, put bluntly, that means they're a waste of money. They are potentially unfair, but they're also a waste of money, because the whole point of having them is to do efficient assessment fairly. And so I think that's a big piece. But the big piece around this is not trying to do this in isolation in TA. I think we have to be very, very sort of inclusive in our approach and collaborative. So think about consulting with your data science team, your IT strategy and ops teams, because they will all be very much on this journey. HR, think about your workforce planning teams, the legal compliance and regulatory teams are vital in all of this. And I was on a innovator AI accelerator call for AMS a couple of days ago, and our head of data protection was on the call, and I learned something I didn't understand about this landscape from him on that call. And this is the thing, those people know more than me about this stuff, and that's really important that we reach out to these experts. But we've got to think about what's our risk appetite, what have we got to cover in terms of local variation versus global consistency, what's acceptable use of generative AI at work, and what are our security needs. And I think that's the kind of conversation that needs to be had. So I'm going to just do a quick sort of set takeaway slide, and then over to everyone else. So the quick summary: I think AI is changing, improving very fast. Legislation is trying to keep up, but it will do so. The candidate intention to use it outstrips actual use, but the gap is closing very quickly, and that's the same with vendor use and client use of it. Many assessment vendors have developed or are currently using AI to design and deliver the solutions. But it is an opportunity for innovation. And I think that's what's really exciting about this. And whilst I was despondent at first, I probably went through the stages of grief. If we still believe in that change curve, probably don't. But if we do, I probably went through it. Is accept the excitement now is that's actually an opportunity for innovation. That there needs to be a multi-pronged approach to managing AI in assessment and selection, but there's no need for panic. And that first principles are really what matters. So I went to a US conference, the SIOP conference, which is for occupational psychologists, and then I went to the UK one a couple of weeks ago. And the attitude there is actually, if we use AI fairly, if we look at its transparency, its explainability, if it's legally defensible, if it's accessible and monitored regularly, then that's what matters. There's just a couple of quotes there that I quite liked as well from the FT. There was an article about that generative technology is rebalancing the power dynamics towards applicants. I like that idea that we're putting, essentially generative AI puts the power back in candidates' hands. It's a nice way to think of it. But also that Thomas Kimura-Brumachik, who's a really good writer in this space, he wrote a really great book about humanizing AI. How do we remain human? I can't remember the title of it, how do we remain human in the digital age? But a few years ago, hirers were pretending to use AI to look cool, even if they weren't. And now they are pretending not to use it. And so that's a really interesting quote I thought we'd leave on. Okay, so, I've got a great question there. Oh, that's for just looking in the chat. I'm not looking in the right chat.
I have just encouraged anyone, if they have any further questions, to drop them in the Q&A, but there is a question here. I think, Claudia, for you probably, but Nicola, please do jump in, about whether you've been working with any compliance and risk teams about the introduction of AI, and have you seen any selection ideas been blocked on the basis that they think it's, the risk appetite, it doesn't meet those requirements?
I don't have hundreds of examples. I've got a handful. But in the cases where I have worked with the internal risk and compliance teams, they have been very constructive. They don't want to block it. And that's your sort of, those are the kind of organizations which are probably have more progressive attitudes towards innovation anyway. I've actually weirdly ended up sort of in a network of data protection people and data science people, because we're trying to do the right thing. The values of it, and this is what I think there's been too much for kind of the evil AI will take over. That actually most people who are trying to engineer this stuff and implement it have only the best intentions, and that includes the compliance and legal people. So no, I haven't seen ideas be blocked. Really, I think the panic blocks it sometimes, and sometimes there are legitimate reasons for it to be blocked, and that's good. You know, we will do where we don't think something's safe, we will not roll it out. So I don't think so.
And I think, Claudia, our wider ISE membership would echo that as well. So the latest kind of data we're seeing is that about 70% don't currently use AI in their own recruitment and assessment processes. But a lot of the reasons why they're not are probably not yet rather than not ever. And it is getting that confidence and understanding and coming through some of these legitimate challenges in terms of how and when it's appropriate to use.
Yeah.
Similarly, they also tend to find that they don't have a problem with students or candidates using AI in the process. But I thought your point earlier about having a clear policy and communicating to candidates is really at the nub of that, though, because you need to know what your internal parameters are, and you need to be able to explain that to candidates clearly to be able to work efficiently on that basis. Because if you don't have a problem, brilliant, but if you do, then you need to let people know so that they know how to engage appropriately as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, one of the other things I'd say is that we have now got a partnership with a company called Holistic AI, who you may have heard of. They are sort of experts in AI ethics and AI assurance, and we met them through one of our clients who, and they do a third-party AI assurance. Now, what's really interesting is in their model, as soon as you put AI for the use of recruitment, it automatically gets a high risk score. And then you have to do loads and loads of stuff in the model to get it down. So it starts, so that what I think this is the right approach. So in itself, using this for recruitment has a very high risk of having a negative impact for human beings. And that's why we have to work so hard on how we monitor it, how we explain it, you know. And that's that work that we did with that firm and that client was really, really such a huge learning curve for us. We've gone on to have a partnership with them. In fact, we've got a webinar with them speaking on it about the new legislation coming up at AMS. So that's something to look out for. But yeah,
I think any change to the early careers recruitment process takes a lot of work. You've got a lot of people to convince, you've got a lot of stakeholders and business divisions to get over the line, you've got different regions to consider. So, you know, this is even more than that. So, you know, it's not something that will happen quickly in any organization, although everyone knows they should be starting to think about it, that, you know, everyone's probably getting busy now thinking about what changes they're going to put in place for next year. And even small changes take a lot of work when you're dealing with such big volume and such long, complicated processes. So I think, you know, it's planning ahead, and everyone's so busy with what they're doing now. It's trying to plan for the future, isn't it, really? And just have a mind for that. But I understand exactly how hard it is to make any type of change, let alone something a bit more transformational.
And Nicola, you just mentioned there about different geographies, different regions. And one of the questions we have, and hopefully we've still got a few minutes to talk about it, is in terms of any regions you're seeing being particularly leading edge in terms of AI in selection.
Yeah, so the UK is definitely on the innovative use of AI for assessment itself. I feel like, I mean, the thing is, it's difficult now because most of our vendors are global. They're not, but there's a history in the UK of this very, and actually in Europe, there's, you know, we like to play with new ideas in this space. In fact, we've got quite a mature attitude towards assessment and selection that's not shared globally. So that's, I think that's, I went to a European conference last year and really exciting stuff there that people are talking about. So I think UK, Europe, definitely for the assessment design itself. Of course, the US as well, but they are really very, very cautious about the legislation. And so it's, time will tell whether that stifles any innovation or not. What's interesting, though, is that in jurisdictions where there's less legislation, there is lots of use of proctoring, AI proctoring tools. And it's kind of like they're using it to stop cheating. They're also really innovative, but it's really not very well regulated. And so what might be acceptable in some of those regions to test out on candidates wouldn't be acceptable in others. And one of the things we have is we have global clients in the main, and we can't, we have to take the most punitive legislation in that organization and run with that. So it depends where you go, but I think just talking to some of the vendors based in Europe and UK, I think so much good stuff is going to come out. But it's expensive for them to develop, and so they have to have clients signed up to wanting to use it, and it's a bit of a vicious circle at the moment in terms of funding the R&D that goes into this it's very expensive.
Yeah, hugely so. Really interesting. Thank you so much for sharing all of those thoughts with us, Claudia and Nicola, for today's session. We have a couple of minutes left if you have any final thoughts or comments. We've concluded all of the questions, so I'll leave you to give us your final thoughts, and then we'll be thanking everyone for their time.
No, I think just to say thanks so much for joining. I know everyone's really busy, so it's great to have people on the call. And if you do have any other questions, just reach out. And there is a recording. Yep, it's been recorded and it'll be shared straight after this. But yeah, any questions at all, just reach out to us directly. Love to speak to you.
Yeah, and just from me, thank you for everyone's time. Love to share this stuff. It's very exciting. Yeah, it's hopefully that it's been useful for people.
Brilliant. Well, thank you both so much for your taking us through this very practical and engaging hour together. I'm seeing lots of thank yous coming in the chat as well. So thank you, audience, as well, for your questions and your contributions, the polls, as well as the questions and sharing of insights in the chat. So as Nicola said, we will share this recording. It will actually be in the next 24 hours that you'll receive it. And as Nicola and Claudia have offered, if you need to pick up with them directly, please feel free to after today's call. Thank you, everyone, so much. We hope to see you at another ISE session soon. Have a great afternoon. Goodbye.
Bye. Thanks,
Bye.
Georgia.
Thank
Bye.
you.
Thanks. Bye.